Chapter 5, Implementing Training and Certification Standards. Our objectives: explain national standards for training qualifications and certifications. Describe the purpose and advantage of credentialing for emergency responders. Identify ways to use cognitive learning skills and apply them to an effective psychomotor lesson plan. Explain the advantages of the professional qualification standards with regards to safety. List the components of a JPR. Describe some of the differences in training requirements between volunteer firefighters and career firefighters, as well as state to state, and the effects on safety. Describe how the methods of training should be adjusted for various risk scenarios you may encounter. Describe how the FESHI model combines training and education into one complete package. Explain the advantages of a tiered system of certification and how it could improve safety. Okay, now this chapter is one that's really near and dear to me. I'm a firm believer that any training we do or you attend should have some sort of credentialing tied to it. Something other than just a departmental certificate that says you completed XYZ class. And I really believe that we should tie it to NPQ certifications or national registry or some sort of credential done from an outside agency to testify that you have met a minimum competency. That way, this education you have, this piece of paper, means more than just, the paper that it's written on. So first, before we get rolling, let's look at our current applicant coming in the fire service nowadays. Now, things have changed from the 18-year-old or 20-plus-year-old stumbling in off the street, looking for a job with a high school diploma or a GED. Granted, we still have some of that today. Now, one thing to consider about these individuals, their mindset, their generation is different from what we're used to. They're more highly evolved with technology and applications than folks of yesteryear. However, they have lost or haven't been exposed to that hands-on component in terms of such things as, when I came along, it was, okay, you're in high school, here's a chainsaw, and, help your parents, cut up a tree, or, luckily, of course, didn't cut my leg off or anything. You do more hands-on mechanical stuff, change your own oil, things of that nature. So you have this certain trade aspect that kind of came with the applicants of yesteryear that we don't have this year. So it's important to understand the difference between when you came along and the individuals that are out there now. Now, a lot of times with these current applicants, when you look at them, they have more education, and even possible they move from out of state. And we'll talk more about reciprocity in coming in from other areas. And actually, there's a high number of folks, transferring from state to state and trying to get credentials. And, certain states will allow it and others will not. So let's look at relocation first in terms of the problems. Now, there are many training certifications that are not recognized, and not only from a trade standpoint in terms of like ProPOR or ISAC or minimum firefighter competencies, but also in terms of higher education. And when you're looking at it, it's important to note that whatever college educations you get it from a regionally accredited institution as opposed to a nationally accredited institution. Regionally accredited usually means a better credentialing or certification process, so whatever classes you take will transfer from state to state or other agencies, where you have such things as a national accredited program, which is only good maybe for that institution or an employer that doesn't really care where it comes from. They just want you to have that associate's degree, bachelor's degree, or whatever the case may be. When we're looking at our fire training or even EMS training, we have a big issue in terms of what people are trained to do in certain states versus other states. And that's why I really believe we need a national standard which would allow for individuals in public safety, fire, EMS, to be able to transfer across state lines or even work calls just over the line without any kind of reciprocity or hiccups or regulations. So let's look at the EMS side of things. As you may or may not know, nowadays in the fire service, it does seem that primarily most of our cars are EMS related. Many departments you're looking at 80-85% versus fire calls, which keep dwindling due to fire retardant materials, sprinkler systems, and things of that nature. So standard of care. For EMS, standard of care is defined as the care a person would expect to receive in a similar medical crisis in a similar area. Unfortunately, standard of care can differ from region to region. It is common for ambulances in some areas to do everything that an emergency room would do, while in other regions they would just drive you to the hospital. Now, what happens is just as important as where it happens. And it's important to note in your area what the standard of care is. And, back when Georgia had I-85, intermediate I-85 standard, that was pretty cutting edge, where an EMT could start IVs, give oral glucose, and certain other medications. Now, if you looked during that time frame over to, say, Alabama, an EMTI was higher trained than the Alabama EMT, which was basically a first responder, somebody to drive the ambulance, do basic first aid and CPR. So notice how that standard of care is different in between the two states. Chain of survival. Now, when you look at the American Heart Association, they have certain links in there from early access, early CPR, early advanced care, definitive medical care, and continuation of care to ensure that an individual has the best chance of surviving their incident. Now, the chain of survival does not take into account where you are. It still has to be in place when you need it. Now, the standard of care can be based on your geographical location. So, in a perfect world, the chain of survival and standard of care would be the same. Unfortunately, that's not always the case. So, let's look at an example here. Where should I go into a cardiac arrest? And in the text, they talk about a casino. Now, a casino is a great place to go into cardiac arrest because these locations are very good at the chain of survival. You have AEDs all over the place. You have people trained in CPR. Of course, you have people all over the place. So you have immediate care, activation of 911, and then hopefully the continuation with advanced medical personnel. Maybe they have on-site EMTs and paramedics that can do advanced life support. So when all these facets line up in the chain, your patient has the best opportunity to survive. So immediate recognition and activation of the response system, early CPR, rapid defibrillation, effective advanced life support, and integrated post-cardiac arrest care. So this is a private organization that has created an acceptable standard of care. Now the question is this or can this be done across all federal, state, and local government lines? And the answer is yes, but not very easily. And this basically has to do with the struggles between state and federal governments. And it goes into such things as heated debates between speed limit, death penalty, gun control, gay marriage. Many states, such as New Hampshire, passed state sovereignty resolution that protest the intrusion by the federal government into state issues regarding the 10th Amendment. However, the federal government keeps the states in line with the promise of tax dollars, grants, revenues. Highway funds are sometimes withheld or at least threatened from states that have a different opinion on such things as a maximum speed limit. Federal grant money for the fire service is dependent on the following federal rules and regulations. For example, NIMS, the National Incident Management System Compliance, and National Fire Incident Reporting, or NFIRS reporting. So federal government said, hey, you want this federal grant tax dollars money coming to your organization. And of course, everyone says, yes, we want federal funds to help buy new equipment or replace existing equipment, or maybe it's an AFG, Assistance to Firefighter grant, where you get personnel. So, a grant, of course, is free money. So they hold the purse strings. And in order for an agency, such as the fire department, to get these funds, they have to be NIMS compliant, meaning that everyone within an organization at certain levels must have those lovely FEMA independent study classes, the NIMS classes, the 100, 700, 300, and 400 for the upper levels, 701, 702, 703, so forth and so on. Also, in order to get this, you must be reporting your data in terms of response times, calls you go out on, and things of that nature to be eligible. Now, more cooperation by EMS on a national level has the potential to improve service, opportunities, and the safety of emergency responders. History has proven that annexation, response areas, contracts, mutual aid, fire districts, and regional disaster response blur the geographical lines, if not completely erasing them. Difference in both requirements and terminology make direct comparison of initial fire training and certification processes in the United States extremely difficult. States make changes fairly often based on the decisions by their governing bodies and suggestions by their constituents. And department drills vary from department to department with no set standards. Some departments follow a specific curriculum and others just meet it. So you look at training for a firefighter in certain states, it's extremely different than, a firefighter in other states. One state that comes to mind, for example, is Florida. Florida is a very difficult state for EMS and fire personnel to transfer into. Now, you may hold pro board certifications or state EMT and paramedic certifications, but if you try to get a job in Florida at that, you're probably going to hit a brick wall. Because in Florida, for example, firefighting, they want you to go to a technical college and have so many hours of a set curriculum, basically equivalent to kind of like an associate's degree. And then once you get done with that, then you're eligible to be hired on by a fire department where they do basically your firefighter 1 training, but they won't talk to you until you get that credential from that institution first. And similar with EMT, though, EMT maybe is a little less taxing these days if you have National Registry certification. Also with firefighting, to back up for a minute, they want you to have so many hours in like swift water and so many hours in these categories. So if your initial education did not meet these required hours, then again, they're not even going to talk to you about getting a job or applying with them and being eligible. So with that being said, the inability to find equivalent firefighters means complete reciprocity is rare. And reciprocity basically means if you have a license in Georgia, you should be able to, go to Florida and fight fire and do the same thing. So there should be, and this is going back to those life safety initiatives that we're focusing on. Initiative 11 states there should be standard responses and similarity trained professionals with Initiative 5. So I do believe that there should be a minimum competency, and again, we have an organization, private organization, that says, yes, you've met this minimum competency, here are the required minimum training hours, so forth and so on. And then we get the, local governments, state governments, the federal, all people on board, and we have this unilateral standard. Now, it doesn't mean, in my opinion, doesn't mean that, you're a turnkey employee. Now, there should be some gaps. For example, in let's say Tennessee, on the EMS side of things, you really wouldn't expect them to know how to treat jellyfish stings versus, say, somebody in Florida. So, again, we should agree upon a small set standard, but then once you get employed, let the employer bridge those gaps for small issues that are area specific. Now, there are many leaders that are working to bring certifications and training to a common ground set rules. And we'll look at these organizations. And in terms of higher education, FESHE is one that's being pushed by the National Fire Academy. And that is the Fire and Emergency Service Higher Education Standard. And basically, it lays out training classes and programs and topics that should be covered in the FESHE program, and that has to do with your higher education, your associate's and bachelor's level. And in theory, if you go to a FESHE program, whether it be regionally or nationally accredited, then those FESHE classes should transfer to other FESHE institutions, East Coast versus West Coast. Other organizations are ISAC and Pro Board, and ISAC stands for the Internal Fire Service Accrediting Congress, and Pro Board, or NPQ, is National Board of Fire Service Professional Qualifications, and these two organizations are very, very similar. These organizations help provide components of what is becoming a national framework for education and certification. So in order to get a credential from these institutions, they lay out a set of minimum competencies, both hands-on and cognitive, for individuals to make. And once they meet those benchmarks, then they're issued a credential. Or let me rephrase that. I don't want to get the terminology confused with you guys. A certification is a better word. Certification is a certificate issued from an institution saying that you met minimum competencies, where a credential is more of a license. So what we're hoping to get from these individuals is a certification that states will recognize and issue a credential so that you can practice EMS or firefighting in that state. The first piece of common ground is basic training, what we teach. If basic training requirements were the same nationwide, we would be well on our way to standardization. Initial training not only involves what we teach, but how we teach it. Now, one common feature of the fire service for initial training is the adoption of National Fire Protection Agency, or NFPA 1001 standard, which is for firefighter professional qualification at the Firefighter 1 and Firefighter 2 level. Again, NFPA is a private organization that recommends minimum competencies and standards. And it's actually important to note, a lot of times they're seen as an expert. So if somebody gets hurt or injured or something happens, a lot of times the powers to be will reference NFPA as a standard that individuals should be held accountable to. Now, whether or not that's law in that jurisdiction or state varies. Now, the NFPA standards are internationally recognized and adopted, readily available, and reviewed regularly. They have committees, they make changes, and they update them about every 4 or 5 years, depending. Now, the professional qualification series of standards are written as JPRs, or job performance requirements, that describe the performance required to accomplish a specific duty. The standardization of JPRs ensures that students learn both the knowledge and the skills necessary for the job. Publishers of fire training material often use the NFPA standard to develop the text, curriculum, and your supplemental training aids that they produce for the fire service. The standard includes the knowledge, skills, and resources needed to meet the requirements. So we already have this framework out here, and really it is up to us as a profession to really start pushing the powers to be in our own jurisdiction, from the fire chief to local governments to legislators, governors, congressmen, senators, to start adopting this as a standard that's recognized by the state. That way, if in Georgia we agree that, hey, if you have this NFPA 1001 standard, you can be credentialed as a firefighter, and you have somebody coming over from Alabama or Florida, Tennessee, South Carolina, it's okay because they have the base, again, the based minimal knowledge to do the job. Not saying that they're going to be 100% turnkey. You may have to do some training for area-specific stuff, but they know enough to do the job and not get anybody, of course, hurt or injured. So let's turn our eyes and our hat here for a minute on how we teach things. And this goes a little bit into like the instructor realm. So one thing you look at is Bloom's taxonomy. And this is a way of people learn through the different domains, or the domains of learning. And the three ones that are out there are cognitive, which is basically what I call your book knowledge, memorization of key facts and figures in order to do a job or make a decision. You have psychomotor, which is physically doing, and then the affective, which is basically has to do with feelings and values. Basically, it's synthesizing or extrapolating, making a decision based off your cognitive and your psychomotor abilities. Now, modern Bloom's taxonomy has 6 specific levels of learning, and they basically, go up. First being remembering, second understanding, then applying, then analyzing, evaluating, and creating. So with each level, it represents a certain mastery of the information. With creating is basically the pinnacle or the top of the food chain, where you have gone through the other levels and now you're basically making something new and better based of all the other concepts, from remembering basic facts to understanding to applying it to the job, analyzing how things work, evaluating, seeing what can be done better, and then, of course, creating something new. And when we go back and start looking at, JPRs, we identify at what level should the individual be at to have minimum competencies. You may have certain things that are at the remembering phase, such as fire department history, and then applying would be maybe strategies and tactics, and creating could be something past course entry level, maybe fire officer 1 or some sort of fire officer 2 level. Now, certification requirements vary again from state to state, but once a firefighter has completed the initial training, they may become certified and then, hopefully credentialed by the state. By meeting the minimal standard, it ensures that a curriculum can be developed that puts an emphasis on completing tasks using course safe practices. Now, career firefighter basic training based off of 1001 times vary greatly. It can be anywhere between 200 to over 400 hours because many add classes to the 1001 standard. Now, reciprocity, where firefighters wish to relocate, have a difficult time transferring certifications because the training isn't the same, as we said, from state to state. Because, again, as I mentioned, Florida wants you to have, say, 400 hours, but in Georgia, it may only be 200 hours. And it even varies from department to department on the amount of hours each recruit class is. And, if we factor out EMT or fire, if you do both, you're looking at possibly a year for most Metro Atlanta departments. Where others may do just a basic firefighter training class or a firefighter 1 class, and you can take that down at Gypstick Fire Academy, and if memory serves correctly, you're looking at a 8-week, 40-hour-a-week class, so that's 320 hours. So it just depends. Of course, we haven't even talked about, till now, what about volunteers? And if we look nationwide, predominantly most firefighters are not paid. They are volunteer professionals. And should the volunteer credentialing standards be the same or different from paid departments? Now, some chiefs feel that if the initial training is too much of a burden, notably with the volunteers, then they're not going to get any volunteers. And if they don't have any volunteers, they're going to run into some serious issues in trying to protect their community. So it's a fine sword here. If you start mandating so many hours and so much stuff, are your volunteers going to get pushed out? Do you have separate credentials for volunteers versus paid? And again, this is way higher than me, and we can obviously discuss this. I'd love to know what you guys feel. Should it be the same or different? And for example, to reference that NFPA 1001, that minimal standard for firefighting, the debate is raging right now with the standard up for review on requiring some level of EMS training in the standard to meet that minimum competency. And I tell you, they're going back and forth on it, something fierce right now. So it'll be interesting to see if the new NFPA 1001 standard that's coming out here shortly in the next year or so will actually start requiring individuals to be trained at the EMT level or higher, such as the advanced or paramedic. Another aspect that we need to look at is once individuals get that initial certification credentialing, what about in-service training requirements? And this is stuff, that takes place on the job after the initial training, and it builds on past experiences. It reiterates your safety concerns, concepts, and expands on initial training. And in Georgia right now, in order to maintain your credential as a firefighter, they only require 24 hours of continuing education as approved by the fire chief. And there's a lot of controversy on that right now. Used to it was hours approved by standards and training related to firefighting, and they had task books out there that went over like the same old 13 Common Core basic firefighting from forcible entry, folding salvage covers, and things of that nature. So I'm not so sure that Georgia right now has the best answer by leaving it up to the fire chief. But again, do we want the state to dictate across the board the training requirements across the state, which, depending on the area, may vary on what things are important to that area. So, for example, if you have jurisdictions like, say, Hall County that has Lake Lanier, they may be more apt to practice water rescue, swift water rescue, recovery operations, things of that nature. So, would you force everyone to be training on that if they don't even have a appreciated body of water to deal with? So with that being said, here's some recommendations for our in-service training requirements. And this has to do with, common skills. And Gilbert Graham in the Fire Safety Loss Control, I've got his video. He does a great video. Feel free to look it up about high risk, low frequency, low risk, high frequency, high risk, high frequency task. So what they recommend, or he recommends, hey, the stuff that you should train on is stuff that may be high risk and you don't do it very often, because that's the thing that's going to turn around and bite you in the butt. Other theories are, well, we should review high frequency events that we go to a lot and low risk, and of course cover basic type operations. Other ideas are your target hazards. And what I mean by target hazards, such as pre-planning, maybe it's a high angle rescue with construction type companies or warehouses or factories. Maybe it's extrication from machinery, or wherever the case may be. But you're really not going to know till you get out in your community and see, hey, what do we have? What is our potential for pitfalls, or that high risk place? What scares you the most about your jurisdiction if something were to happen there? Do you have a chemical plant? Do you have oil refinery? Do you have, nuclear waste running through? And other hazards to even think about, such as natural hazards. What do you do in case of a tornado? Where are you going to shelter people? Transportation, fresh water, and, of course, your long-term concerns. Hey, funding issue. This is a big concern of mine, coming from a training background. And it always seems when the economy turns south, or something breaks, the first place they cut is from training. And it's important to note that some training cannot be done in-house. that you need to send people out to get this new knowledge out there, whether it be conferences such as FDIC, or maybe on the EMS side, changes, educator conferences, things of that nature. And when you start cutting training and preventing people from getting this experience from experts and outside agencies, this is going to directly relate to a compromise in safety. So I'll get off my soapbox here, and of course, to me, training should not be the first thing that is cut. Granted, you got to have trucks on the road and you got to have people in seats, but I'm a firm believer once we start cutting training, it's going to be a recipe for disaster that can eventually, one day, when the stars align, uh, bite you in the butt. Now, accreditation is awarded to certifying agencies, educational institutions, and programs that meet the criteria of the accrediting body. And again, the accreditation is only good as the body that issues it and how well they are recognized. Now, the accreditation process normally consists of three components: a self-study, a site visit, and then report on what they do. Now, one significant advantage to accredited programs in two different geographical locations is that reciprocity is very common. Now, the two major fire service accrediting bodies in the United States, each with its own rules, are the International Fire Service Accreditation Congress, or ISAC, and the National Board of Fire Service Professionals, or NPQ, as we mentioned earlier. Now, ISAC provides accreditation in the United States and internally. There are two assemblies with ISAC and degree assemblies. The ISAC Certification Assembly accredited certification programs are based on specific standards such as Nfpa 1001, and it's peer driven. And Pro Board, to me, is a mirror image of it. It's just a different body, and you have some states that are ISAC and some states that are Pro Board. And if I'm not mistaken, I think I read somewhere the other day that the two were merging, which I think is a good thing. Now, with these different standard organizations, for example, in Pro Board in 2013, they offered 85 different levels of accreditation, over 18 different standards. And, such things as Firefighter 1, Firefighter 2, Instructor 1, Instructor 2, Fire Officer 1, Fire Officer 2, Apparatus Operator, Pumper, Ladder, Swift Water Rescue, Technical Rope Rescue, you name it, it's out there. And to me, again, I think this is a great institution, and any class you take should be tied to these credentials. And here in the college, I do have it set up where you take certain series of classes here, and you'll be eligible to sit for the Pro Board certification exam for Fire Officer 1, Fire Officer 2, and Instructor. Because as I said, I'm a firm believer in it, and I think we should make every effort to make that the standard. You look at a lot of departments and job descriptions, they start referencing those credentials or that standard in order to be eligible for promotion, or they make it a preferred qualification. So I'm really hoping that we keep heading in the right direction, and as a state, and we all start adopting this and we start adding credentials. So hopefully maybe one day the state will even start recognizing training, like say a training position or a training chief, as a credential that is issued by the state. That way the people that are training individuals aren't just good firefighters, but they have the credentials to back it up in terms they've taken such classes as live fire instructor, safety and survival, and make sure they have the tools necessary to make sure that they meet the 1001 standard for basic firefighting training. So, higher education requirements. Some departments now are giving incentives to further one's education, or they make a requirement to get promoted, such as an associate's degree for an officer, maybe a bachelor's or master's for a battalion chief, even all the way up to a PhD in some sort of related field, whether it be fire science, public administration, emergency management, and fire protection systems, just to name a few. Now, several of the degrees are becoming obtainable online, and that seems to be the industry norm now. As, of course, this program here at Athens Technical College is available 100% online. So individuals that currently work in the fire service that are traditionally handicapped with that 24 on 48 off schedule make it very difficult for them to attend a regular set class every Monday and Thursday night or wherever the case may be. Now, there are other options out there in terms of higher education in the fire service, and one in particular is the EFO program, or the Executive Fire Officer program, and that's done at the National Fire Academy, and that's kind of geared for that master's level training, but of course you don't have to have like a master's to take it. It's a way for the Fire Academy to impart that level of training to our upper management individuals without that master level's cost. You have other type things such as business associations that organize and offer training and continuing education to its members, and even such things as your physical agility testing and your ongoing, like say, physical agility tests, or maybe for new hires. And that is a big area of controversy for a lot of departments in terms of physical agility tests. Fire department jobs can be very competitive. So you have a lot of individuals that may or may not say, hey, your test was biased, or created what is known as an adverse impact, meaning it discriminated against a certain ethnicity or gender group. So having a test that's been validated helps negate that. And one good example of that is the CPAP test, or the Candidate Physical Ability Test. And I tell you, if you've ever taken it, you know what I'm talking about. If you've never done it, Google it, look it up. It is a pretty tough entrance exam physically. But this test, provided you pass, proves that you meet a certain physical requirement and should be able to do the job. And it's been validated by all these outside agencies, so it's kind of beyond reproach when it comes to litigation. Of course, it does come with a price tag, and a lot of departments say it's cost prohibitive to do it. But basically what it does in a nutshell, it allows the candidate to practice the test, run through it a few times, and get prepared before taking it. And the physical demands of the test are totally based on tasks that you will have to do on the fire ground. From climbing the stairmaster to crawling to forcing a door or pulling ceiling tiles. All the exercises or machines, the repetition that is done during that test is solely based on what you will do on the fire ground. Now moving forward, where we should be in terms of recertification requirements. Now, the advantage obviously includes the ability to track who is currently active, ensuring that the continuing education or in-service training is occurring, and to track the number of active individuals for statistical planning. Meaning, okay, if we put out this required training nationwide, are so many hours, we know how many people are currently credentialed, we know how many of them are doing continuing education. It's a way to make sure it's not just being pencil whipped, and it gives us a more accurate number on the number of credentialed and certified individuals across a state or jurisdiction or across the nation. So it allows you to track or forecast the need. We're projecting we need 10,000 firefighters next year, but we only had 9,000 certified, recertified. So hey, we got a thousand holes that are going to have to be filled. So it allows you to plan accordingly to start recruiting and training that next generation of firefighters. And I'm not just talking about your entry level, and we really need to do a good succession planning, meaning people are going to retire from upper management areas. So you're going to have new people taking those roles, and they're going to have one heck of a learning curve unless we do good succession planning. Make sure they have the tools to do the job when they get promoted. They have the right education, they have the right training. It can be such simple things as allowing individuals to write up one spot. So, for example, if you have all four people on duty, why not let the firefighter drive? That way they get practice driving with the driver riding seat next to him or the officer to allow a resource to help critique them so they start getting that hands-on training before they get thrown to the wolves. Or having that FAO ride seat and let the officer drive the fire truck. Again, that way you have that resource right there next to you. And granted, that's rather difficult if you have four assigned and somebody's always off. But again, to me, that is something that really needs to take precedent and money needs to be allocated so we can start doing this good succession planning. So earlier we talked a little bit about the FESHI model. So let's go a little more in depth with this. The Fire and Emergency Service Higher Education Model, or FESHI, is one of the most inclusive models for the future of training and education to come out of the fire service. It was last adopted in 2009. The model basically lays out a path for a firefighter to progress to the level of fire chief. The model takes into account the total package of what training and education should include to create an effective leader. Although the U.S. Fire Administration facilitates the meeting and annual conferences, the fire and emergency service instructors are going to be the driving force for the direction of this model. So when we look at the model here, you've got firefighter 1, firefighter 2, special certifications, your fire officer 1, which should be equivalent to an associate's, fire officer 2 again in that associate's level, and then on up to fire officer 3 where you have your bachelor's, fire officer 4 should be a master's, and then of course fire chief. Again, tying these credentials to pro board certifications, I think, is an absolute must. Now, it may be cost prohibitive for some individuals to go to higher education, getting like the associates and bachelors, but I do believe if training organizations can still get the material across, people can still get that Fire Officer 1 credential, Fire Officer 2, and Fire Officer 3, on up, of course, to Fire Officer 4 at the executive level and the EFO, Executive Fire Officer, in terms of the fire chief. Tier training is a very important part of this concept, and we're quite familiar with this, more so I would say like in the hazmat world where you have, just an awareness level, operation level, and technician level. And this really falls into a lot of your specialty categories such as like car seat tech, hazmat, as I said, rope rescue, and things of that nature. Credentialing is the key here. Now, September 11th attack demonstrated that some sort of credentialing would be necessary to prevent security issues in the future. And Presidential Directive Number 12 helps line this out. And in 2004, George W. Bush ordered the Department of Homeland Security to establish a system of personal identification verification credentials for the State Department to identify and validate federal employees and contractors. First responder authentication credentials. Credentials have always been a part of an emergency worker gaining access to certain locations. So for first responders, credentialing has begun to take the form as first responder authentication credentials. Credentials also have the potential to make several aspects of emergency services safer and easier. So what we're getting at here is such thing as like instant commander could ascertain whether responders had the training to complete a task. So when you start having all these individuals coming in like 9/11, you need to know that, hey, they can do what I need them to do. Now, again, a firefighter in one jurisdiction may have only certain training and task as opposed to one in another. So, credentialing is the key. And in order to get deployed at a FEMA event or one of these national levels, they start looking at basic minimum competencies or that credentialing, so that like when hurricanes hit, you have medics, you have firefighters, you have search and rescue teams that are credentialed at that minimum level, and they're all operating under the same guise and terminology. Okay, so let's sum up this chapter. The fire service has to establish minimum training and certification standards. We lack a coordinated effort to create minimum standards for firefighters regardless of the location where they respond. Standard credentialing, certification, and recertification would provide the opportunity for safety to be interwoven into all aspects of training. Standard of care can be defined as the care one would expect to receive in a similar medical emergency in a similar geographic area. Individual states have their own methods of training and registering or certifying firefighters. Many organizations are working to establish minimum standards for training, and that includes your FESI, ISAC, and Pro Board. Most training for firefighters utilizes the Nfpa Standards. Bloom Taxonomy utilizes the three cognitive domains of learning, cognitive, psychomotor, and affective. In-service or continuing training is vital to improve job proficiency and learning new skills and building on past experiences. And I do want to say things change. Look at fire behavior. I can say, back when I went through recruit school many, many moons ago, one thing that was a bedrock thing that was taught was, okay, if you're going to attack a fire, you go in the front door, you make a left, you go down to the room, you find the fire, you put the fire out. You do not attack the fire from the unburned side, because you'll push the fire, and that really wasn't the case. NIST studies are out there that shows, hey, if a fire travels or moves, it's due to airflow and current and things of that nature. So what we've learned yesterday has changed today, and there's all new technology out there, and we need to stay abreast of it because we're professionals. Granted, I understand the concept of, hey, if it's not broke, don't fix it. But what if there's a better and a safer way to do things? Now, accreditation is an auditing process that a department or agency can request. Business associations can advance the occupation of their members and offer training and communication on a national level. In the future, it is likely that many organizations will continue to bring training and recertification standards under one set umbrella. Common standards for certifications can also be beneficial for credentialing. Okay, gang, so if you haven't done so already, please, please, please read the chapter. Make sure you do your review questions. And again, if you have any questions for me, you can give me a call in the office here at 706-357-0162, or you can email me at aroberts@athenstech.edu. Until next time, be safe and have a good shift.